Okay, imagine this for a second. You've got a text that's over 1,400 years old, and someone asks you to prove, like with hard data, that it hasn't changed. Not one bit. Sounds pretty much impossible, right? Well, believe it or not, we're about to dive into a study that tried to do exactly that. So let's just stick with that core question. How do you prove an ancient text hasn't changed over time? I mean, seriously, if I put that challenge to you, where would you even start? What evidence would you look for? And maybe the hardest part, how would you show it in a way that's completely unbiased, with zero personal opinion mixed in? Well, one scholar came up with a pretty powerful answer, and he did it by creating a book. But here's the twist, and this is what makes it so unique. He did it using none of his own words. Not a single one. So let's get into our first section here. This idea of a book with no words. You've got to be asking, how on earth can a book prove anything if the author doesn't write a single word of commentary? Well, it all boils down to this really clever method of just pure direct comparison. Yeah, this quote on the screen pretty much says it all. No commentary, no explanation, no personal input whatsoever. The entire point was to get out of the way and just let the data do the talking. The goal was pure, irrefutable proof with no filter. All right, so how did he actually do it? How do you build this kind of proof without using your own words? In this next part, we're going to get into the real nuts and bolts of the comparison, the how-to that makes this whole study so fascinating. Okay, so the study itself is called The Eternal Quranic Text Across the Ages. And the concept behind it, it's actually super simple, but that's what makes it so powerful. It's all about a direct, word-for-word comparison of just one single chapter from the Quran, Surah al-Isra, across history. Here's the research method, broken down. Step 1, he picked one chapter, Surah al-Isra, which has 1,559 words. Step 2, he tracked down 18 different manuscripts from all over the place, from different centuries. And step 3, the big one, he compared them word for word against a modern copy you could buy in a bookstore today. Every single word was documented. And you really have to appreciate the timescale we're talking about here. These manuscripts spanned 14 centuries. We're talking from the very first century of Islam, the time of the Prophet's companions, all the way through the medieval world, the pre-modern era, and right up to a printed copy from today. It's a massive historical stretch. And look, these weren't just some random, dusty old scrolls. We're talking about some of the most famous manuscripts in history. You got the Birmingham manuscript, the Sana'a manuscript, even copies that are traditionally attributed to some of the earliest leaders in Islam, like the caliphs Uthman and Ali. Using these heavy hitters, it just adds a ton of weight and credibility to the whole thing. All right, so we've got the method down, a super detailed word-for-word check across 1,400 years of history. Now for the moment of truth. What did he find? Was it a perfect match? Let's see. So this table gives you a little taste of what the actual book looks like. Page after page, it's just this, a word from a modern printed Quran, and then that same exact word from a manuscript from the 1st century, the 3rd century, the 8th century. You can see it right away. They just line up perfectly. And the result? Honestly, it's pretty astonishing. After sifting through all these manuscripts from different times, different places, written by different people, not one single word out of all 1,559 was missing, and not one single word was added. The core text was identical. But then you see this chart, and you might notice something a little weird. The match is super high, like over 98% on average. But wait a second, the lowest match is 92.6%. It's not 100%. And that leads to the big question, probably the one you're asking right now. If I just said no words were added or missing, why isn't the match a perfect 100%? What's going on with that other few percent? What's the deal with that gap? Okay, let's solve this little mystery. It turns out that gap in the percentage has nothing to do with different words or missing words. It's all about something way more subtle. Different ways of spelling the same word. The easiest way to wrap your head around this is with a simple English example. Think about the word color. In America, we spell it C-O-L-O-R. In Britain, it's C-O-L-O-U-R. Are they different words? Of course not. Same meaning, same word, and here's the key part, exactly the same pronunciation. And that's exactly what's happening in these Quranic manuscripts. For instance, a word like al-kitab might be spelled with a full letter for the ah sound in one old copy, but in another, it's written with just a tiny little mark over the consonant. Both were totally valid ways of spelling back then, and just like color and color, they are pronounced identically. And this gets us to the absolute heart of the matter. You have to remember, the Quran isn't just a book you read. First and foremost, it's an oral text. It's meant to be recited, to be heard. So while the way a word was spelled on paper might have had slight variations over the centuries, as long as the pronunciation never changed, the word itself was considered perfectly preserved. The sound was the constant. Okay, so now that we've cracked this spelling mystery, let's pull back and put all of this into context. I mean, this level of preservation is interesting, but how does it stack up against other ancient texts? We need something to compare it to, right? To really get a sense of what these findings mean, you need a benchmark. And a really good one comes from looking at the manuscript history of another major world scripture, specifically the ancient Greek manuscripts of the New Testament. Right, so there was this similar study by a researcher named Peter Gaddari. He took 350 ancient Greek Bible manuscripts and compared them. Now, just to remind you, the Quranic study found 0 added or missing words, just those spelling differences. So what do you think he found in the Bible manuscripts?
The number he found was more than 500,000, 500,000 textual variations. Now, we have to be really clear here. The field of biblical textual criticism is different, its goals are different. Scholars in that field will tell you the vast majority of these are tiny things like spelling errors, and it includes every single kind of difference imaginable. But still, that number is huge.
And to make that huge number a bit easier to grasp, check this out. On average, you're looking at about 5 variations for every single word in the Gospel of Matthew. For the Epistle to Titus, it's 7. It just goes to show a fundamentally different history of how the text was passed down, one that was mostly based on scribes copying written texts versus the Quran's focus on oral recitation. So what does it all mean? When you see this kind of near-perfect textual preservation, what does that really imply about a document's history and how it was passed down through the ages? You know, putting these two histories side by side, it's a stark contrast, and it really leaves you with something to think about. What does this level of consistency, built around an oral tradition for 1,400 years, actually tell us about a text's journey through time?